and co-founder of FinBoot. And to moderate this discussion, Eric Ragg, Head of Business Development for the Algorand Foundation.
No, okay. Good afternoon. There we go. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, I'm very glad you're here, and it's kind of special because you're based in Barcelona, so you didn't have to come far for the conference, did you?
I didn't know. I'm like literally 2 blocks up, so happy to host anyone in our office if you're still around over the next couple of days.
Good, super. So Juan Miguel, the founder of FinBoot, a very interesting company. We're so pleased you're coming to Algorand. And a few things briefly, you're based, most of your people, you have 22 employees, I believe. Most are based in Barcelona. You've also got offices in Cardiff, in the UK.
So we're headquartered in Cardiff, and we got part of the team there, but a big hub here in Barcelona. Both technology and commercial teams in both hubs, and we have started, let's say, a little bit of an activity over in the US and North America as well, with some commercial links there as well.
Super, super. And a amazing roster of clients as well. I think Repsol is one of your clients, enormous oil and gas and chemicals in particular. So there's Repsol, which I think is a 70 billion turnover company. There's SABIC from Saudi Arabia, massive chemicals conglomerate, 140 billion.
So
and others.
We work with large enterprise clients, right? And large enterprise clients in capital-intensive industries. Again, we're very proud of having kind of long-term relationships with the likes of Repsol. We've been working with them since 2018. Today, our relationship with Repsol spans over several business units. More than 400 of their employees are in our platform or interact with that on their day-to-day activities. We're connected and implemented across every industrial complex they have in Southern Europe. That's Spain and Portugal. And
these are enormous oil refineries with flames coming out the top and big tanks everywhere.
Basically, yes. And more that are introducing low carbon, circular, and renewable raw materials into those that same infrastructure to minimize and to help them in that transition to net zero.
Super. So maybe what we do in terms of structure is we start off in the beginning. I would love to hear about supply chains generally for these types of clients. I mean, I think that there's, I see Elizabeth there in the front, maybe raise a hand. So there's other supply chain people here. I think Elizabeth is doing bags and fashion items and so on. You've got this great experience with oil and gas and chemicals, but what is it over the last few years that have made supply chains such an important focus for big companies?
Sure, no, if we kind of take it up one level and just look at supply chains as a whole over the past 10 years, right? I think you moved 10, 15 years ago, most people haven't even heard about supply chains, right? Or because things were working fine, you didn't really care, right? Everything was fine. But over the past 5 to 10 years, a lot has happened, and you started to see supply chains come up more and more in the news, right? So again, starting with the trade wars between the US and China, that has kind of brought up a lot of movements and shifts in supply chains with now companies in either nearshoring or ally-shoring their supply chains, as opposed to maintaining that kind of globalization vision that we had through most of our industrialization in the 20th century, right? Then in comes COVID and just created a whole bunch of other disruptions in our supply chains across several industries. And then after COVID, we then had a few more kind of disruptions with the war in Ukraine, with the conflict in the Middle East and the Red Sea. So all of that has brought a lot of complexity to what used to be an ecosystem that was functioning like perfectly fine, right? Or that it was a supply chain function that they had their own stress and their own challenges and so on. But for the business, for the sales, for the commercial, for the C-suite, supply chain was working fine. They were overcoming all of those challenges. All of these new disruptions created a lot of kind of issues and breakpoints and just new things that they needed to overcome, right? You add that to the energy transition and the decarbonization of our industries. In most industries, the largest part of their emissions comes from the supply chain. That's the case for every capital-intensive industry that we work with, in oil and gas, in chemicals, in metals. Over 80, if not over 90% of their emissions comes from the supply chain. So if you're going to decarbonize these industries, you need to look at the supply chain, right? So all of this has happened over the past 5, maybe 10 years.
Wow. And specifically within these kind of, how does a company, or how can your solution help a company where, what would be a great example of somebody who 80% of their emissions is coming from their supply chain? What would that look like?
So our whole positioning is to help our customers accelerate their energy transition and their sustainability targets, essentially, right? And the way we do this is essentially if we look back at 2016 when the Paris Agreement was signed, like what that kind of created was all of these organizations started giving their targets for decarbonization, right? They have 2025, 2030, 2040, 2050 targets on how they're going to be reducing those emissions progressively, right? Amazing that we got those targets, but now that's only the beginning of the work. Now you got to start measuring, right? You got to start collecting that data and figuring out, okay, where are my emissions now? How am I going to reduce these? As I introduce low carbon, circular, and renewable products into my portfolio, how is that affecting then my emissions and how has that reduced? All of that is backed by supply chain data. And what we do is we help our customers capture that supply chain data. Enable that action to come directly from the suppliers, right? So that the suppliers can say, here's the raw material, but also here's the data on carbon emissions, here's the data on the sustainable provenance or the low carbon provenance of this could be a vegetable oil, or this could be used cooking oils, or this could even be plastic waste that we're putting out there in our recycling bins, right? So that's where the traceability starts. And what we want to do is just essentially map that entire journey until the products that we ourselves then consume, right? So just to give you 2 very practical examples, and then we can kind of deep dive into some of them a bit more. With Repsol, one of the areas that we work with is on sustainable fuels, right? So sustainable fuels that are done with vegetable oils or with used cooking oils.
It's like is this when they take the stuff from the deep fat fryer at McDonald's,
Exactly.
and then they put it through a process
And then they basically create this synthetic crude oil that it could go into our cars, it can go into planes, and that essentially the reduction on emissions comes from the supply chain, because it comes from the fact that you're using used cooking oil from a large fast food franchise that has all that frying oil there, and we're going to repurpose that to produce sustainable aviation fuel. Now, traceability is super important there. Another example is on packaging, what we do with Savic. Sorry, go ahead.
Maybe this is jumping into the detail, but how would you trace that? Because I guess you have a restaurant. They finished all the cooking for the day. A truck goes to the restaurant. They pour it into the back of the tank of the truck, and then is it measured when it is then taken to the facility, or how does that work?
So this is one of the reasons why blockchain is such a let's say killer technology for supply chains, right? Because you got to have layers of this, right? So molecular traceability of these things is impossible, because ultimately you have, again, the used cooking oil that goes into a cracker, which you can imagine is just like a giant oven, and a lot of things go in there, and then you got the fuel coming out of that, right? So you're not going to have the molecule of the potatoes we fried all the way out to how we're refueling our tanks. So then you got to add that to, okay, we'll work on chain of custody of how a raw material is then handed from a supplier to a producer, how that producer is then pumping that raw material into that oven, and how the product is then distributed and consumed, right? So the chain of custody needs to be mapped. That's an area where blockchain can help. Then you have the whole documentation, and documentation could be certificates of compliance, certificates of analysis for the quality of these materials, declarations of sustainability. All of this is information that needs to accompany, documentation that needs to accompany the physical asset, right? We are also tracing, and then we're linking that chain of custody to that documentation chain, right?
Okay.
And then ultimately you also have a layer of where you're basically working out of accounting principles, right? So in order to reconcile the processes where you cannot implement physical traceability, what you do is you measure, okay, how much renewable content I put in. This gives me the capability to claim an X amount, depending on my process losses, of my circular product, right? And that's an accounting ledger that you need to keep in and like book every transaction.
Okay.
And a ledger where you book every transaction is essentially a blockchain network.
Got it. Interesting. So you would have maybe plastic. I mean, I guess SABIC, for example, must be one of the biggest plastics makers in the world, right?
They are, and their biggest, let's say, or primary portfolio product right now is what they call their True Circle solutions, which is circular and renewable plastics, right? So this is a supply chain. Well, similarly to what we discussed on fuels, you're taking plastic waste from municipalities, ocean-bound plastic as well, and then you're processing that into another synthetic crude oil, right? So it has the same quality and the same characteristics of our fossil-based materials, which is in part a really good thing because it means we can use it in the same way, right? And we already have a gigantic industrial complex built around that. But it's a material that is coming from waste, essentially, right? So it could be 100% waste, how you create that synthetic crude oil, right? That then goes into the chemical manufacturing complexes, and then you create circular polymers at the end, right? So again, all of that, there's multiple stakeholders, there's a very complex chain of custody, there is the management of those sustainability credits that needs to be done. That's essentially all we focus on at Finwood, right? Enabling that for our customers.
And so is the end result of this process is that they want to be able to offer to their customers, they say, okay, here's some plastic, works just as good as the other stuff, but we can prove to you that 50% of the content of this plastic is recycled.
Correct.
So you should pay us more for it.
And that's exactly what it is, right? So I mean, because then the question is on, okay, why are manufacturers doing this, or why are producers doing this? There's of course the moral standpoint of, well, it is the right thing to do, and it's what we have to do if we are to meet our targets. But let's also be realistic. These are businesses, right? And they are doing this primarily because ESG and sustainability is a gigantic business opportunity for them. Consumer-facing brands are paying premiums for these circular products and for these renewable products. What happens, and they've been paying them for a while now, what has happened recently is because they've been facing so many greenwashing claims, these brands are now telling their supply chain, I'm only going to pay my premium if you can prove with documentation, with traceability, with evidence-backed data that that's a circular product. So that has now these organizations moving back and saying, well, we got to figure this out, because otherwise what we were selling as circular is not going to be paid for as circular. And then there's the second element of that, which is the regulatory play, right? So the regulator is also pushing, and the regulator is also making these organizations shift their behavior. And while Europe is in many ways ahead of the game in that curve, we've already seen how European regulation kind of has a global impact, right? We saw it with data protection. GDPR came in place here. Ultimately, companies realize we can't keep double standards of data management. We just got to raise everything up to that GDPR compliance level, right? I think we're going to start seeing the same with some of the regulations around digital product passports, around deforestation, and around supply chain due diligence that are coming already in Europe and are going to have a global impact.
Okay. And I guess when there's, using the example of the plastic gets sold to the customer, which is IKEA or a big shop or somebody who's producing something else with the plastic. Does that then flow through to the customer? Is that kind of the end of the journey, or what happens next?
So I think not yet, but that's very much the vision, right? So how do we get then this data to us as consumers, right? And that is part of what we're trying to build with our customers is, again, progressively getting closer and closer to the consumer. Ultimately, the reason we're not there yet is because they needed enough of their products to be duly traced before they can push that out into the market, right? But what we want is essentially, hey, you go out to a shop, you grab that plastic or that product in a plastic packaging, and then you can actually read a QR code or gain insights into the plastic waste that was used to produce that, right? Today, what we're seeing is a lot of misleading labels, right? Things that already Europe, California, and other jurisdictions are putting a stop to, and I think that's super important because all of these misleading labels our marketing efforts to make us think that a product is sustainable, when in reality, if you look at the composition, it really isn't. And the other way we can look at the composition is if we are sharing that information in the supply chain, and if we, as consumers, can get access, well, what's actually in this, and what's the carbon footprint? Don't put labels like, oh, this is recyclable. What's that even mean, right? I mean, in principle, we were considering that as a given with a lot of our products, and then it turns out that, oh, so then a lot of what I'm putting in the recycling bin was not recyclable before, so I think that there's a lot changing in the consumer landscape, and a lot more is going to change on how we consume supply chain data as consumers.
Great. So super fascinating, thank you. And maybe what we get into now is sort of a bit of the nuts and bolts technically of how your solution works, and then we can talk about your transition to Algorand, what motivated that, and how you're finding the experience.
Sure. So as we said earlier, right, we started the business in 2016. So we've been around the kind of blockchain scene for a while. We, from the beginning, me and my kind of fellow co-founders, the vision that we had, again, 2016, Ethereum had just been created a year before, if I remember correctly. It was kind of that early days of blockchain for business and the applications that we could have there. And then, as soon as we started seeing other ledger technologies pop out, right? And then our vision was, okay, we got to make sure that what we build is future-proof, right? And being future-proof to us meant, well, if one of these ledger technologies or blockchain networks ends up failing or disappearing, we have to make sure that we can support our customers with a new technology. So with that in mind, what we built as that kind of abstraction layer or almost like a layer 2 technology was a blockchain agnostic mechanism, right? Which ultimately meant the kind of the back engine of our product is like one of those universal plug sockets, right? You go to America, you put one adapter, you can use your products. You go to Europe, you put the other one. You go to the UK, there's yet another one, right? So we took the same mentality to say, well, actually, if there's going to be such a diverse ecosystem of chains, we got to make sure we can support all of those, right? You fast forward to today, and what we saw is, again, ecosystems are now starting to consolidate in specific networks. And with that vision, we said, okay, where can we go that has the scalability that our customers require, that has the fees or the costs that our customers can manage, because ultimately at the end there's so much data, there's so much output coming through. It's not so much the size of the fee that our customers are concerned, but the stability of that fee, right? So how stable that is through time, and I can't have a software cost today that is 10x tomorrow, right? So that was another element that was important, and then again, the speed of the transactions as well was something that was truly important for us, because ultimately, I can't tell a client, oh, you're sending me the data, but hold up, we got to wait a couple of minutes until that gets confirmed and you can do the next step of your production process, right? It can't work like that. And we really wanted to make something where, again, blockchain is part of the live solution, right? It's not decoupled, it's not separate, it's not like you're working and everything here, and at some point that will land on a blockchain, right? So we wanted more integration between those two. All of those different elements landed us on Algorand in terms of this seems to be a technology that kind of fits with all of the technical requirements that we had. And as I said earlier, as we did the announcement, what truly and definitely sealed the deal with us with Algorand was their commitment with sustainability, right? So the fact that it's the only net zero emissions blockchain out there, and that we are a green supply chain management company helping our clients with sustainability. We don't want to be doing that with the baggage of we're working on a carbon intensive blockchain network.
Got it. And I think you were, when we were speaking a couple weeks ago, because I know the conversation between the foundation and yourselves kicked off last year, but speaking a couple weeks ago, I think some of your developers were so happy and kind of doing little, even things you don't need, but they were playing around with the developer toolkit.
Yeah, some of them are in here.
All right. Maybe they can put their hands up.
Oh,
there we go. Okay.
That team that kind of ran the migration, I think definitely, well, because part of the challenges that we had with the previous networks was that speed, that confirmation of the transactions, and then you had almost like my account managers going at hey, this isn't happening, like this is not getting confirmed, I'm having this problem, I'm having this issue. And we realized that a lot of the issues we were having were linked to the blockchain network, right? So we're linked to delays and latency of the network itself. So we said, okay, we gotta do something about this, because as I said, I can't have a customer, or I can't tell my customers, oh, you gotta wait because of blockchain, right?
So it was just sort of I mean, maybe as simple as kind of there's a wheel going around on a screen as you're waiting for.
We tried to make it as less painful for the user as possible, and in principle, all of it happened behind. But if it failed or if it was delayed, like they would have realized that, oh,
I see.
it's not confirmed. So they could do other stuff, but they still knew, like, okay, I'm doing other stuff, but that hasn't been confirmed, and that hasn't been confirmed. That's a problem.
Yeah. And can you maybe you can give us a sense of how data heavy some of these processes are, and I don't know if that's in terms of like number of transactions on chain, or whether it's kind of information in terms of certificates and stuff you're storing.
So what we've done, right, is we really wanted our solution to be very flexible and very configurable, because ultimately the requirements for data vary very much from company to company and from supply chain to supply chain, right? So just to give you a sense of that, both Savic and Repsol use our product for, among other things, the traceability of their plastic packaging solutions, right? Now, both of those ecosystems are implemented, but they are very different one from the other, right? Ultimately, because they have different facilities, a different number of facilities that are at play. They have a different structure of the supply chain. They have different requirements on what they ask for their suppliers in terms of quality, compliance, and sustainability. So then what we managed to create was almost like a no-code configuration layer, where I'm building up our supply chains. Is you go into a web application and you start putting the pieces together, right? So you say, oh, this is my industrial workflow. Step 1, these are the 3 data points that I want to capture. Step 2 is this. Step 3, and so on and so forth, right? And what this allows us to is create, again, an infinite number of supply chains for our customers, depending on how they use it and how they want to use it, right? And all of that can also be interconnected, as in 2 sources of raw materials then go into the same process, right? What that kind of creates or translates to, in terms of answering your question, is that you can maybe have some products that have a lot of transactions, right? So one plastic bottle, maybe it's 100 transactions behind it. Or maybe there's a plastic bottle where, oh, this is mechanically recycled, we only wanted to see 3 data points. That's a handful of transactions, right? There's also the level on how you introduce the granularity, right? Do we want to trace each plastic bottle, or do we do it by batch, or do we do it by output of my plant, right? So there's a lot of, let's say, variables there, and one of our kind of primary value propositions to our customers is we can cover any of those, right? So we can adapt to any of those.
So simplified version would be you have a process that's baking a cake, and you have kind of, there's some eggs go in and some flour and some, that type of a...
Exactly, and maybe you care where the eggs come from, but you don't necessarily care where the flour comes from, right? And then that means there's more transactions in one layer and less in another one.
Got it. Okay, and I guess the accounting point you made before is what you don't want is you don't want a situation where you say, oh, okay, so we have 50 tons of old plastic, we have 10 tons of new oil that's been dug out of the ground, and we have 100 tons of recycled plastic. That kind of doesn't work.
And what we want is to give the granularity for our customers, right? Because what most organizations can do today is they tell you, oh, of our yearly output, or maybe of our quarterly output, this percentage is circular, this percentage is renewable, this percentage is fossil. We want to bring traceability down to the batch, right? So that you know everything that is coming out of your facilities, you know exactly what that is, right? You're not doing estimates, you're not kind of doing high-level assumptions. No, you have full traceability for every batch that goes out of your industrial complex.
And as you look to expand, do you feel like there's a lot more to be done with oil and gas, chemicals, heavy industry, or do you see this kind of going down more the consumer track?
So a bit of both, right? I think there's two things that we want to do next, right? So one is, again, continue consolidating our position in our three core industries. We've got oil and energy, chemicals, and metals. Those are our essentially metals.
Okay.
And what we want to do is basically continue to deep dive and further expand within those industries. Today, our technology is already implemented globally. We have facilities in North America, Latin America, Europe, and Asia that are using our technology with customers that, while they may be headquartered in Europe or North America, have all of them a global reach, right? So the next stage for us is, okay, these great logos and great accounts that we managed to land, let's grow them, right? Let's continue to scale them and move into other products within the portfolio, but let's bring others from these three key industries into our ecosystems, right? And that's kind of like our short to midterm goals is to focus in our three core sectors. What we see for the long-term growth is we want to expand this beyond oil and gas, chemicals, and metals, right? So again, part of that translates into going further downstream, right? So going into the textile industry, going into the consumer goods, and moving further downstream. We are likely going to move in that direction through partnerships, and what we're doing right now is, again, not only strategic partnerships with the technology angle, like we've done here with Algorand, but also have industry-specific partners that allow us to do this scalability at a faster pace.
Yeah. Okay, super. So maybe what we'll do, I think we'll leave, perhaps we get a microphone and give people the opportunity to ask questions. In the meantime, well, I'll put you on the spot, if I may, a little. So there's two things. One is, a lot of stuff happens in the blockchain crypto space, in my experience, with kind of vaporware, phantom announcements, people being bribed to say things, all this. How much did the foundation give you to move over to Algorand?
Nothing so far, but we'll talk about
Okay.
that. I'll go find you guys later.
All right.
No, I think, as I said, right, you said so, right? We've been speaking with you for about a year now, but actually this is a process that started long before that for us, right? So we started looking at different technologies. Again, we are fast movers and we are a small organization and we can introduce things very quickly, but we also have very big clients that were already using the technology, so we couldn't make this move just loosely and say, oh yeah, let's see what happens, right? Because again, my clients are relying on our services, right? So this was a journey, and this was a lot of exploration. And again, because the technology was built with an agnostic mentality, the team was already quite experienced across different ledger technologies. But when we started narrowing that down, then we said, okay, we think we're going to go with Algorand. Let's go speak with the foundation and get that conversation going. Ultimately, because what we wanted to see as well was, okay, if we move to a technology, we need to make sure that there's a developer community, that there's sufficient support out there to make sure that that's not going to fail, right? And that's what that journey kind of moved to explore.
Super. Okay, and the other thing is, you guys are based in Barcelona. If somebody here maybe is connected with a big company, or if they're super interested to see the technology, would you be okay if they came by your office in the next day or two?
100%. You're all welcome to drop by. Again, connect with me. I'm going to be around the rest of the day, and some other members of the team are here as well. So just reach out to us. We'll be happy to, again, show you around our office, show you the technology, either now that we have you here in Barcelona or through video after the fact, right? So please do reach out. More than happy to show you what we can do.
Super. That's very generous. Thank you. Is there any questions from the audience?
We're the only team.
Okay, I have a question then. Okay.
Hi, well, thank you for this. Really interesting talk. As Eric mentioned, very similar to what I do, but with luxury assets. My question to you is, the tool is very powerful and you've really explained the use cases for it. How did you go about highlighting the value proposition to the businesses, and why this data or why this transparency would be efficient or important for them?
Yeah. No, and that's, again, an excellent question, and one that kind of needs to be broken down in layers as well. Because ultimately, with these large organizations, it's not the same value that I'm giving the C-suite, to the one that I'm giving to the business managers, or to the industrial user, right? So ultimately we have employees in these organizations at the refineries, at the manufacturing facilities using our tools. To them, what we wanted to give them was, look, this is going to be ease of use, right? What we're driving there is ease of use. Enterprise software has historically had a horrible user experience, and everyone hates the tools that are brought in, and we focused on, we want to make something that is really easy for you to use, right? As we move out to the business managers, what they are interested in is growth, right? Is how am I going to sell this, right? What impact is this going to have in my accounts? And ultimately, the value for them is they are the ones being pressured by the brands to, if you don't give me the data, I'm not paying the premium, right? So there's a quick business benefit there, right? And then at the C-suite level, we're talking more about the strategic value of the technology, right? It's digital has to be a part of your strategy moving forward, and within digital, blockchain is certainly top 3 technologies out there. And then sustainability is definitely a part of their strategy, and then that's the level. So ultimately what we need to, and it makes the process more complex, right? But that's what happens when you go to large enterprise, but different layers or different personas within the organization will perceive the value differently.
Great. Anyone else?
I'm happy to take the questions over lunch as well, right? So reach out if you're shy or anything, just reach out and we can have a chat later.
That's great. I have one final one for you. How do you find doing business in Barcelona?
I think, look, I'm originally from Venezuela, actually, so I'm not local. I've been living in Barcelona for over 10 years now. I came here for a year and a half and then never left. So you can imagine that I really like this city. I really like the ecosystem and the vibe. Over the past 6 years or so, the kind of tech ecosystem and startup ecosystem locally has changed drastically and for the better, and it continues to improve. And while I think there's still some hurdles in terms of making the ecosystem more startup friendly, we've certainly come a long way from where we were, and today Barcelona, I think it's a flagship European tech hub, and you can see that from, again, in this district alone, you got Meta, you got Amazon, you've got Revolut and N26, so all of these kind of big established tech and emerging tech players, you got Finboot, we're all here, so I think it's still a growing ecosystem.
Super. All right. Well, Miguel, thank you so much for the session. That was super interesting.
Thank you all.
Great.